What? How did? Well, welcome to Hoist the Colors, episode number 3. Patrick Madden, Tim Best, and we actually get to talk about basketball that's actually played in this season. And I know it's an exhibition, but there was actual basketball that we got to see. I know Patrick got to see it live at the WEC in Newark. Obviously, I only got to see the numbers and the final box score afterwards. But on this episode, we're actually going to talk some ball that was played. Also going to touch on Big East Media Day that happened on just last week that I was there for, covering the entire conference, but obviously got to Seton Hall as well. And then we're going towards the end, we might do a little preview on the season opener a week from tonight against St. Peter's. Patrick, let's start with this exhibition game. I mean, you were at the WEC. What were your personal takeaways? And, what'd you like about this team? What didn't you like? And, where does the team go heading into the regular season?
Well, the score didn't particularly reflect the game. NJIT, a lot of people had commented that NJIT was taking this game a little more seriously than they're going to take a lot of regular season games because they get a major powerhouse school and a local school into their building, even though the game was an exhibition. Obviously there's a lot of, there's a decent crowd at that game. I don't know what type of crowds NJIT plans to bring in. They had, about half full of a building that fits about 3,000 people, which is probably better than what NJIT usually plays in front of. They have a couple. Coach Billemeyer mentioned on our last episode there were a couple of players he really liked on his team, and the one guy, Alan Hess, a shooting guard, was on fire at the beginning of the matchup in the first half, and the Pirates had some trouble adjusting and closing out the shooters. So then we get to, in terms of what went right and what went wrong, I think that the top 4 players on Seton Hall, they're starting guards and wings. Kadari Richmond, Alamir Dawes, Dylan Adewusu, and Dre Davis are all in something close to mid-season form. I think they all play together well with each other. Obviously the first 3, Richmond, Dawes, and Davis all played together last year. I think Wusu fits into the system very well. If you look at the box score, Wusu had the highest plus minus on the Pirates with 19, meaning that when he was in the game, Seton Hall outscored NJIT by 19 points, which means that he was doing a lot of things well. He wasn't doing anything spectacular the way Richmond did with his 26 points and nailing down the 3-pointers. And even Davis, who had, I think he ended up with 16 and 9, which was, and he had to do that playing not only the small forward and the power forward, but there were a lot of minutes that Holloway had Davis playing center. NJIT didn't have a particularly threatening big man, so you could get away with playing Davis against NJIT's big man. And then in the second half, obviously, they did a better job closing shooters out. Hess didn't get as many good open looks. And then, Seton Hall played very disciplined offense in the second half. Alamir Dawes, for example, went 1 for 6 from 3, but most of those misses came in the first half. In the second half, when he had opportunities with the ball to score, he attacked the basket more and was very effective doing that. Again, that's against NJIT, a team that's, in a low major conference, but still the fact that Dawes made his own personal adjustments in the second half tells you that he's in a good place in terms of, what his thinking is on the court. If we want to touch upon some negatives, Seton Hall got very little, if anything, from any of their big men. Jaden Badenko and Hutchins Everett got into foul trouble. They both drew 2 fouls early in the first half, and each drew 2 fouls within minutes of them getting into the second half. And it's telling that Holloway had so little faith in them down the stretch that, when he was playing the last minutes of a game which was maybe a 2 or 3 possession game throughout the last 5 minutes, he wouldn't go to Bediako or Everett. He kept the lineup of Richmond, Davis, Dawes, uh, Wusu, and Isaiah Coleman playing. I think Coleman was playing the small forward, but he had Davis playing the center during the closing minutes of a 2 or 3 possession game. So I don't know. I don't know what you read into that. Bediako showed a couple of things early on in the game, but he also showed that he was, careless defensively. 3 of the fouls he committed out of his 4 were 2 of them were whacking guards 20 feet away because he couldn't make the switches properly on NJIT's big man. And then the third one was a foul on an offensive rebound that he had no business getting. So he was in effect, going after a ball that, he shouldn't have done so. And that's something that you would expect a veteran player to be able to show a little more discipline, making sure he understands what his situation is in terms of foul trouble. I think Everett's just very raw. I think we'll have to see what happens going forward. I think a lot of people sort of saw this coming because he's coming from Austin Peay and he's moving up to the Big East. Even though they weren't playing they weren't playing a major opponent on Saturday, I think he's still learning the system a little bit, and that's why he's getting in the bad positions, and that's why he's drawing fouls. So that's something which Holloway's going to have to straighten out over the next week, 2-3 weeks before they get into the big game, the big Thanksgiving tournament in San Diego. You want to see the big guys more effectively defending, and you want to see them staying out of foul trouble.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, especially on the point of the bigs, I'll touch on that and kind of like give uh, a comparison almost just from my personal experience. Seeing a game my sophomore year at the Hall. But I mean, my takeaways. Number one, Kadari Richmond is him. I'm telling you. I mean, we saw this so many times in the Big East Big East play, specifically when he was healthy. He was the straw that stirs this team's drink. I mean, I still remember in a losing effort to Providence in the conference opener that I was there for with the Igloo. He was just dominant all game long. He is a Swiss Army knife. He does anything and everything. He's a really good scorer. Rebounds the ball well because he's a 6'6" point guard, so he can easily size up any and all guards that he goes up against, unless a team will match him up against a guy that is around the same height, athletic ability, build, etc. So I mean, Kadari was just incredible in this game particular, and I think it might be foreshadowing what he could be capable of in the regular season and beyond, because we all saw the level of play Kadari was playing at and the elevated play of his team as a result. Because it goes back to again, he's the straw that stirs the drink of this team. And the one thing that I noticed with Kadari last year, and I know he's going to take it with him now that he is the leader on this team, with his production and vocally, now that he's kind of come out of his shell, designated captain role, and he's had to take it head on and be more vocal. And because Kadari, as we know, relatively quiet guy until, he's kind of come out of his shell within the last few months, assuming the captain's position. But the thing with him, he is a lot more disciplined. I mean, you talk about his 3-point shooting. He was 2 for 3 from 3. That means he's taking the right 3-point shots. He's taking calculated risks, right? Because Kadari's not known as a 3-point shooter. If he's going to take 3-point shots, it's a calculated risk because he's going to have to take them when they're really wide open looks. If he has to, it's probably because the shot clock's winding down. He has no other choice, but he's taken good open looks, shots that are within his wheelhouse and not trying to force anything. So, and he did obviously, he scored the ball at a high rate. I think he shot like 60% from the field. And then, he rebounded the ball 9 boards, and then he had 6 dimes on top of it. I'm telling you, Kadari is going to be the guy. He has got not just all Big East potential. If he can get it all together and elevate his team's play, He's got all Big East first team talent. I'm not saying he's a first teamer. He has all Big East first team caliber talent. And if he can hone that together, because over the last couple of years, it's kind of been hard to hone that in and get that motivation to have him maximize that potential. But he has it. That's not even a debate. Okay, he has the talent. It's a matter of putting it all together and have the motivation to bring it each and every night. And then let's go back to the bigs, right? You're going to need to play. The bigs have to play at a high level each and every night in the not just in regular in non-conference play. They're gonna have to do it in the Big East because think about some of the bigs: Ryan Kalkbrenner, Donovan Clingan, Oso Ighodaro, Bryce Hopkins to an extent, Joel Soriano, Eric Dixon. I mean, need I say more? They're going to have to bring it. The bigs are going to have to bring it each and every night, and they can't do it if they're going to be in foul trouble. It's simple. So let me go back to turn back the clock to 2016. I'm a sophomore at the Hall. Seton Hall is playing St. John's in a Sunday matinee at Madison Square Garden. And this is when St. John's first year of the Mullen era, and they are terrible. But they're coming off their first Big East win of the year after starting, I think, 0-13 or whatever. I think it was 0-13. They just beat DePaul 4 days before that. So we go into the Garden. Seton Hall crushes them in the first half. Second half, the bigs get in foul trouble. Delgado, Sanogo, and Rashid Anthony off the bench. Those guys get in foul trouble, and that allows St. John's to chip away. And this is late February, so Seton Hall, they want to make the tournament. They can't afford to lose this game. And St. John's, because they get Angel fouled out first, if I'm not mistaken. And Rashid fouled out because for those of you that watch Seton Hall, and this is not a knock on Rashid Anthony. He's a good dude, but he would foul people at just an insane rate. So he fouled out pretty quickly. And then Ish fouled out on an and one that I think put the Hall down 3 with like a minute to go. Me personally, I'm like, oh God, we're going to lose this game and our tournament hopes are going to be done right then and there. But they had to play Michael Enzi at the 5, Nigerian Nightmare 6'7", 6'8", going up against some of the bigs that St. John's had. I mean, not great. Not what you want, especially going down 3 with like a minute to go. But somehow, some way, they found a way to win. So I guess the takeaway from this, I know it's different. NJIT compared to a conference game against St. John's. If I'm being honest, I think that NJIT team is actually better than 2016 St. John's. If I'm being frank with you, let's be real. I don't think NJIT would have lost to St. Thomas Aquinas by 30 plus. I'm gonna go on and say that right now. But so what I'm trying to get at here is if that team could find a way to win despite all that foul trouble, and that was with guys fouling out, 3 of them out of the 4 bigs they had. I think the discipline will come, but you really gotta take this week and get that discipline instilled within Bediako, Hutchins Everett, and once you get David Tubeck, that tandem, they're going to be a platoon, and they gotta produce down low, because when you get into conference play and you face the bigs, that laundry list I mentioned, you're going to get eaten alive down low if you get those guys in foul trouble. You don't want Dre Davis going up against the Kalkbrenners and the Klingons of the world.
No, for sure. And as I hinted, it's not like Bediako comes in without experience playing some major big men. Obviously, at Santa Clara, he had to go up against Drew Timme on a regular basis. So I don't think he'll be as starstruck when he plays the Kalkbrenners or the Klingons or the Sorianos or the Ighodaros. The problem is, it's one thing. It's another thing, though, if you're committing bad fouls and you're throwing, Everett into the mix, and, Everett may or may not be ready for that type of primetime experience. And then you get to another guy who saw about, 5 to 10 minutes of action, and that is Nanaga, the transfer from Boise State. You could tell he had some athleticism, but you could also tell that his game still needs a lot of work. He had trouble with switches. What NJIT did was their big man came out. They did a lot of pick and roll action. And when he was left trying to guard a guard for NJIT, he really couldn't handle that. And then for some reason, they weren't telling him to go back to guard the big men and have whatever guard come back up. So that's something which Nanaga is going to have to work on if he's going to be a contributor in the front court. So I do, it was good to see a lot of guys play. It's good to see the plus and minuses of a lot of the players. The problem is that some of those minuses are things that you'll get away with it during the first 2 weeks of the season. You're not going to play serious competition when you play St. Peter's, FDU, Albany, and Wagner. But then you get to that second half of the non-conference when you get playing teams like USC and Baylor and Missouri and Rutgers, where not having an effective big man is going to start to pile up L's quickly.
Yeah, and you're not wrong. I mean, they got to go to Waco to play Baylor. And for those of you that know, in the COVID season of 2020-21, Baylor was supposed to come to the Rock, granted with nobody there. So you would think that maybe they'd do it this time around in Newark, but I mean, listen, I get it. But I mean, this is a non-conference slate. I don't think it's going to get as tough, when they had to go to Kansas, play them at the Fog, and that did not go well. But I would say this non-conference schedule is on par compared to last year's, because I know they're not in the Gavitt games, and unfortunately, that being the case, now that we know what we know, being the last installment of the Gavitt games, and Seton Hall not being part of it, it kind of sucks. But that's the Big Ten's fault. That's not the Big East fault. And that should be widespread, and everyone should know that by now. But that's kind of beside the point. But you look at who Seton Hall played non-conference last year. They played Iowa at the Rock. They played Kansas on the road. They got a big win at Rutgers in Jersey Mike's Arena. It will always be the Rack to me. Don't even try to throw that my way. And then I'm trying to remember some of the other. I mean, it's a blur
Memphis,
because
Memphis and Oklahoma down in Florida.
Yeah, they beat Memphis, but then they blew opportunities with Oklahoma and then Siena. So I'd argue this slate might even be a little more difficult, despite not having a Gavitt game, going up against USC, either Oklahoma or Iowa. You go to Baylor, you play Rutgers at home, and then you got to play Missouri in a virtual road game in Kansas City. This is going to be, I think it's arguably just a tad tougher compared to last year, because while you have Kansas on the road, you have Iowa at home, but I mean, you look at what those teams did compared to what these teams are going to amount to, and I think the quantity of these games, playing Baylor and Waco and USC, and that's going to be a virtual road game playing in San Diego, with USC being just about an hour or so on the freeway to the north. So yeah, you're 100% right. They gotta instill some discipline. And listen, this could be a process. So just as long as you said, if they get that in line by the time they spend Thanksgiving weekend in SoCal, I think they might turn some heads and maybe steal one of those games. I'm Baylor, not counting on that, but I can see them beating Rutgers at home. I can see them splitting in San Diego if they get a payback game with Oklahoma. And then, I mean, who knows what Missouri is going to amount to? I mean, you never know, because who knows what injuries could happen. And as you can see, with a lot of teams, that can derail a team's season. So, yeah, but again, a lot of time to figure stuff out. And as far as I'm concerned, I mean, with the Seton Hall team, I think internally, they think they're a lot better than what people are making them out to be. And I think that segues perfectly into Big East Media Day just last week. Pat, you saw they were picked to finish 9th in the preseason poll, only ahead of Butler and DePaul, but they were kind of close with Georgetown for that number 8 spot. What were your overall takeaways from being picked to finish 9th in the preseason, and seeing some of the quotes from Shaw and his players, from guys like Jerry Carino, Jaden Daly, so on and so forth?
Well, I mean, let's talk about the poll for a second. It's done by the coaches.
Yeah.
And we don't know when the coaches set their orders
Hmm.
because at least two major events took place within the last 2 or 3 weeks before the poll came out. If you remember, they put Zach Freemantle of Xavier in the honorable mention All Big East, and then we find out 10 days before media day that he's out for the season. So I don't know, that's sort of, I think that's the reason why Xavier got picked sixth,
Yeah,
was
and
because the coaches, put a lot of stock in Zach Freemantle being there. And Xavier's probably, I picked Xavier seventh. I sort of kept them there because I do think they have a very good backcourt. But, if you pick them sixth because you think they have Freemantle, and then they're not going to have Freemantle, and that's I don't know if they finish sixth
yeah,
without Freemantle.
it
Then you got
doesn't. Yeah,
Georgetown. Then
it
you got
doesn't.
Georgetown.
Right.
Go ahead.
So no, it doesn't help that Jerome Hunter's going to be done for the year, unfortunately, with that heart condition. So their front court's depleted.
Yeah, but I think everyone knew Hunter was going to be unavailable. I think it was just a matter of them making an announcement. And then I
Right.
think it was like 2 or 3 days before the poll came out, which this you put less in the coaches. You find out that one of Georgetown's important players this season, Ishmael Mahood, the transfer from Kansas State, where
Yeah.
they're expecting to be one of their best shooters, is going to miss a significant period of time with an injury. So I think that if you pick Georgetown eighth, counting on a guy like Mahood to be available for them, and he's not. I mean, Georgetown has a lot of. Georgetown was already coming in with a limited roster,
Hmm.
and they're missing any number of important players, and they're gonna be a little bit behind. Now they might get their act together by the time conference play comes around, but they're already you've already got a roster at Georgetown which is full of players who haven't played together. Epps, Brombar, Cook. You have a bunch of guys at Georgetown trying to figure it out. So that's I think why they allow, and of course the coaches are all going to prop our good friend Ed Cooley up. They know him. They know what he's capable of from his Providence days. The Big East is a conference which traditionally plays upon your experience. Hence why the All Big East team is full of guys who have been on the All Big East team: Kolek, Alexander, Kalkbrenner, Moore, Soriano. All of those guys were all Big East last season. So a lot of, and it's not wrong to put stock on your experienced guys, but then you have to factor in the guys who may or may not be. May or may not, like Kadar Richmond, for example, didn't make an All Big East team last year, which he probably would have been at least second team had he not been injured against Connecticut. So I think that's something where because Seton Hall didn't really do it last year, they're being looked down upon. Of course, I don't want to make they picked Marquette ninth last year. So I don't
Yeah.
want to think that we're going to get history totally repeating itself. I think that's probably very wishful thinking. It's not wishful thinking though to think that Seton Hall might move into sort of like that 6-7 range,
Right.
which would definitely put them in the mix for an NCAA tournament bid.
I'm with you on that. Actually, I know you had Xavier seventh, but with the Fremantle news, honestly, because Seton Hall's, I mean, you think about they. I remember during the off season, I saw what was happening with the roster turnover, and not just with guys that they lost due to the portal. With Tyrese and Odukali, to name a couple, and then Casey and Nadefa graduated. But I remember thinking, I'm like, oh my god, we might finish dead last in the Big East. Like I mean, that's maybe the sky is falling mentality. Seeing all this and like not really making a splash in the portal, but quietly they put together a roster. I was looking at them like, you know what? I don't think I don't think they're not half bad. They're a lot better than I thought they would be. Obviously when all this portal combat was happening, but I was looking around like this team might not be that bad, and they're more than a worthy postseason contender. Looking at the roster, because you have several players. I think at least five guys that have familiarity with playing with each other with, the aforementioned, core four from last year's team that's back, Kadari, Al, and then you had Dre Davis, and there's one other name that I'm blanking on. Oh, and even
That's
Jaquan.
Sanders.
Yeah, right. And
Okay. Which he didn't
you,
play much. I mean, I think the one thing to get back to something from Saturday,
right.
Wusu fits because of who he. The thing I don't know if St. John's fans or Rick Pitino really appreciated what. Again, you talk about, well, his numbers in that box score don't jump off the page, but it's what he plays solid defense, and he can defend he can defend the point guard, he can defend the shooter, and he can defend like a 6'7", 6'8" power forward if you ask him to. He's got a big body, and all he does is make winning plays. Maybe it's grabbing a rebound, maybe it's setting a screen, maybe it's making the right pass at the right time. And even I think it was with like 2:10 to go, he drains like a 18-foot jump shot, which made a 6-point game to an 8-point game. So he just makes winning plays. And again, you look at him and like, all right, he's averaging 9 points and like 4 rebounds a game, but he fits right in the Holloway system.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's why Holloway went all in when St. John's let him go, to go after and made Wusu his number one priority and the first guy he picked off at the transfer portal, when others might have said, you need a big man. You need Osuni, the big guy who ended up going to Xavier. You need somebody of that caliber. And Holloway said, I want my guy. And Dylan Adewusu is my guy. He does what I want a shooting guard or a small forward to do. So I think you put those, and the thing is, those 4 guys know how to play Big East basketball. I mentioned this about St. John's in my preview of St. John's. You can love guys like Jordan Dingle and RJ Lewis and Chris Ledlum. They're all, and Glenn Taylor, all very good players, all had great stats in other places, but none of them have been on the court in a Big East game. And you and I know that, you play games against teams like Villanova and Butler and Creighton and Xavier, and that's an entirely different mentality. Every Big East game is a war. And that's something that, if you're Glenn Taylor, yeah, you play at Oregon State, but, you play Cal, you play Stanford, you play Utah even, and the intensity of the Pac-12 is just not the same intensity that the Big East is. So, yeah, you can say what you want about what you expect a Glenn Taylor to do at St. John's, or you expect a TJ Bamba to do at Villanova, but those guys have never been in the day in and day out wars that are Big East basketball. So I think that's something that has to be taken into account when you consider where Seton Hall is going to finish at the end of the day come early March.
I'm glad you finally jumped on the Dylan Adewusu bandwagon that I vouched for at the end of our debut episode. It's weird. St. John, and you're 100% right. I think St. John's fans underappreciated what Dylan Adewusu brought to the table. And case in point, I literally brought it up at the end of episode 1. Forcing overtime against Marquette in that quarterfinal game that they ultimately lost in overtime. You talk about a winning play. I know it didn't result in a win, but it gave them a chance to play 5 more minutes against a top 5 team in the top 5, top 10 team in the country, the eventual Big East tournament champions and the number 1 seed in the Big East in the Big East tournament. And I mean, the funny thing is, another thing I brought up against Marquette, ironically, right before that, the 4-point play that he just drew a foul, chucked it up, lucked out, went in, and it got it down to like 2. Like it was either like got it down to a 1-possession game, no matter how you size it up. Even if you made all free throws, like still would have been a 1-possession game. So I'm telling you, like Dylan Adewusu, I'm glad that you finally hopped on the bandwagon. It's going to take a lot for me to get off it. If for Dylan to take me off the bandwagon, if you will. But I believe in his abilities. I'm telling you, and I think he's, like you said, I don't think he could have gotten a transfer that's a better fit for this backcourt, and Kadari and Al each spoke on it at Media Day. He fits in like I'm trying to think of what a good metaphor for this. Like he fits in like it's like almost like a missing puzzle piece, if you will. Just that perfect alignment with meshing with the abilities of Kadari and Dawes.
It's almost like he spent his 3 years at St. John's becoming the type of player that fits our system, and it didn't quite fit what St. John's was doing. Either it was because they were totally poorly coached, and I think St. John's fans would probably buy that argument that it was because Mike Anderson just didn't know how to utilize him properly, or he didn't, the type of teammates he had, guys like Curbelo and Champagnie to an extent, and David Jones just didn't know how to work with him. And, people didn't know when and how to get him, like even Posh Alexander, who he played with for 5 or 6 seasons, a couple of them in high school and then 3 years in college. They were never really, and it was probably because St. John's never gave Wusu the minutes that he deserved, that he and Alexander couldn't form the cohesive duo that might have made St. John's a better team. Then they go and rely upon guys like Curbelo and guys like Jones and guys like some of the guys who had
AJ Storr.
AJ Storr is a different. I would look at the guys he had 2 years ago. Coburn, some of the guys who Anderson was bringing into the portal 2 years ago to try and and it's just a matter of appreciate what you have, build your team around Alexander and Wusu, as opposed to trying to find, okay, these two guys don't shoot very well, so we're just going to bring a bunch of shooters in. But then these shooters expect the ball, But I digress. I think the point I'm making here is that the way I think Wusu's game is something that Holloway has appreciated from afar. And obviously he saw him last season up close in a couple of games, so he knew what Wusu could bring to the table. And we'll see if it plays out. Obviously, it has to play out in games that mean something, which start next week. But I'd be shocked if he didn't have a lot more plus games like he had. Again, and the point here is that he makes winning plays, and he takes a team that would lose a game by 5, and they win a game by 5. So I think that's what you're looking for. If you're looking, if what you don't look at the stat sheet and say, well, Wusu doesn't average 10 points a game or 5 rebounds, and he only shoots about 36% from 3. Look at when he makes the plays, when he has to make the plays. And I think that's something, because you have got obviously Richmond and Davis and to some extent Dawes. They're going to put up the bulk of the points on this team, without a doubt. Those 3 guys are going to average probably 50 points a game. So if you get Wusu giving in his 9, 10 points and you get some points from other contributors, they'll score enough if the defense does what it's supposed to do to win more Big East games than not.
I mean, 50 is a lot to ask, because that means you're asking those 3 guys to, like, if we're going to even out like what the average is between those 3 guys, is right around like 16 points. And 16 points, especially with some of the great defensive teams in this league, that's hard to come by. I mean, I think 40 to 45 is, I think it's a fair and realistic expectation, because that backcourt between those 3 guys, I think they can get you, like, bare minimum, I think you're going to need at least a combined 30 from them every game if you want to get back, not just to the NIT, but like taking that next step and getting to the NCAA tournament. And the thing is, obviously, with Seton Hall, you want the defense to take care of a lot of things, and that's what Shaheen Holloway, he prides himself on defense. I mean, he's a gritty New York City guy, and he's been like that forever. And the thing is, a tiger never changes his stripes, and he's been like that since day one, dating back to when he was the MVP of the McDonald's All-American game alongside Kobe Bryant. And then playing at Seton Hall, and never changing his identity of being a Hall guy for life. He took that detour at St. Peter's to get here and build the program in his image. And in year 2, I think it's really going to come along the way that he's envisioned it, what administration and fans have envisioned as well. And speaking of St. Peter's, I think that transitions perfectly into little brief preview on opening night. As again, Monday night, a week from today, Pirates host the Peacocks, 7:30 at the Rock. Looking at St. Peter's, obviously it's a tough transition in year one under former Wagner coach Bashir Mason. Basically, kind of the same spot as Shaheen, although it's Shaheen went to St. Seton Hall, Bashir went from Wagner to St. Peter's. I'll tell you what, Bashir Mason's a good coach. I know he hasn't really gotten the results that have been expected of him, but he has to be some level of a good coach to assume the position held by Shaheen Holloway after, he took them to the Elite Eight as a 15 seed. They got this. They're they're pretty solid. Actually have, a lot of transfers, one of which is Elijah Perkins, who was teammates with Elijah Hutchins Everett at Austin P. And there, it's an interesting roster in the sense that they have a little bit of everything going on. Obviously, the expected result is a Seton Hall blowout, but for opening night, I remember last year because on opening night, Seton Hall whacked. I believe it was FDU they whacked on opening night last year. So I don't want to set my expectations that high, but it's not ridiculous for me to expect a pretty decent drubbing for the Pirates over the Peacocks.
Yeah, I think that it's probably too early to think what. Yeah, we don't want to talk about point spreads here, but that's probably a 20-point win, probably your floor of a game like that. But even then, you're looking to see how they play in a real game. Again, focusing upon how the big guys play. Making sure that Bediako and Everett don't get in the foul trouble and they can show a little bit what they're capable of. I don't think. St. Peter's. They're sort of in a similar position as Seton Hall in that Mason's trying to get what he wants to get done in his second. He's in his second season of his program. He's got a couple of key pieces coming back. One guy in particular to keep an eye on is Corey Washington. I think he's the leading returning scorer, and then he's got a big man, Muhammad Sow, who was on the Elite Eight team. He's not a big contributor, but he's a big guy. So, he's someone who you're going to have to keep an eye on in terms of how he matches up against Seton Hall's new big men. And if Sow's doing a lot of damage against Seton Hall, that's something that might, raise a couple of red flags about what happens later in the season. But I do think, I think history will sort of repeat itself from what happened in the first week of last season, when Seton Hall just, pressured and bullied St. Peter's. Because again, you look at Richmond, Davis, Dawes, all those guys are back and they're probably going to do the same thing defensively than they did, last season to St. Peter's. And they're just too small to contain the Seton Hall guards. So I think that there will be a lot of parallels between what I saw and what people who were at the exhibition on Saturday saw against NJIT to what you're going to see against Seton Hall against an undersized backcourt from St. Peter's.
And speaking of, obviously winning by 7 over NJIT, obviously it's not necessarily what you want. A win's a win, regardless of if it counts or not. But they got the win and they grinded it out after trailing by as many as 10, I believe. Because they were down double digits in the first half, but they chipped away, they clawed back and ended up winning the game by by 3 possessions. But regarding that, again, it's not what you want because you're a vastly superior team to NJIT. But I know I'm taking an unwarranted shot, if you will, but it makes you kind of glad that you didn't lose the game to pace. I'm not trying to throw shade, but come on, it's right there. I know it's low hanging fruit, and it's still, and not to mention NJIT's D1 team. I know they're year one under Bill Meyer. It's going to be a process for him and his team that, I mean, I believe in him a lot that he's going to get him to where he himself and their administration expects him to get. And, they've never been to the NCAA tournament. Maybe he'll change that in a few years, but it's a lot different than compared to losing. And you're also playing that game on the road. Granted, I know there's a lot of blue in the stands, but it's a lot different compared to losing to an NE10 team out of D2 in your home building. I get it. No Soriano, no Dingle. I get it. But, I mean, that's, in theory, still a game you should win. But I digress. But I will say about St. Peter's, though, you talk about they're completely undersized against the guards, right? But they got a trio of dudes who can hang with them down low, and it starts with Muhammad Sow. But you got Umar Diahame and Stefan Roberts. Six not So is 6'9", and then the other two guys are 6'10" each. So they have a trio of guys who can hang with those guys down low. And if St. Peter's, as far as I'm concerned, if there's any area in which St. Peter's can get an advantage, it would be on the interior and on the boards. I think that's, in my mind, that, and if they just get shots to fall, like if they get a 3-point barrage like NJIT did in the first half on Saturday, like they can hang around. But if you're Seton Hall, I mean, they didn't do it in the first week of the season last year, especially against St. Peter's. They can't be sleepwalking Monday night.
You actually have a in of what you had last season when you had FDU as the opener, and now FDU comes back around at the end of week one.
Yeah.
As the second team that they played. And it's a little bit different because that FDU game is going to be at Walsh. But again, you're talking about the same two teams that Seton Hall pummeled in week one. And I don't think it's fair to expect two 40-point wins. I think you're looking for, again, how well is the defense playing? How well are the big men playing? And then are you getting contributions? I mean, unfortunately, you hinted upon a little bit very early on about the NJIT game where you got 1 point off the bench, and that was a foul shot by Everett. You got no scoring from Jaquan Sanders. You got no scoring from Isaiah Coleman. Although, in fairness, Coleman was unlucky on Saturday afternoon. He took some good shots. I think he's the type of guy who I think once the ball goes into the net, he's going to get his rhythm. Sometimes they talk about just need to see one ball go through the net under even a foul shot. And sometimes that's getting issue because now he's not worried about going scoreless in the game. Now he's not worried that he's like 0 for 10 from 3 or 0 for 15 from the field. So I think once Coleman I'd like to see Coleman get a couple of shots drop in these early games so that he's got some confidence for when and if they need him for some of those bigger non-conference and Big East matches. Because, and we hinted upon this a few minutes ago, if you're relying upon 4 guys to score 90% of your points, you're probably going to lose more often than not because teams will adjust to that and teams will figure out how to shut down 1, 2, or more of your lead scorers. So you need a guy like Coleman to give you some points off the bench. You need Sanders to give you a few points off the bench. Sanders just didn't have a lot of opportunities on Saturday to put. He just didn't get his number called that much. I think he's in better shape than he was in last season, but I also think that his defense, he still has to catch up a little bit defensively. And again, he had a couple of shots that just didn't go. Again, he's in a building he's never shot in before. He's on the road. Maybe he gets to the rock for those early season games and he finds the basket a couple of times. And that's another reliable piece of scoring you can get off your bench so that instead of relying upon 4 guys, now you've got 5 or 6 guys or even more who can score the basket. And that just, again, that makes defenses be a little more honest against you.
And again, I'm echoing that same sentiment. And I'll tell you what, after a rough first half against the Highlanders, Shaw, he channeled his inner predecessor, Kevin Willer. He was the chiropractor. He made the adjustments that he needed to make in order to win the game. Defensively, they really hunkered down. 22 second half points. They, like you said, they closed down the shooters better, held them to 1 of 14 from three compared to 7 of 14 in the first half. I mean, you're going to have to be making those adjustments on a more consistent basis if you want to win um, against the quality opponents that are going to be playing out of conference, and especially in the Big East. In January, that they were doing that because I mean, look at the UConn game. I know that was UConn's January swoon. January swoon, something you and I are all too familiar with from the Kevin Willard days. But they still were down by a significant margin, but they made the adjustments, came back to win the ball game. So as long if they can find a way to do that more consistently, I think they're gonna pose a threat to quite a few Big East teams. They might steal a couple from just off the top of my head, like Villanova potentially. Although I know they got swept by them last year, but you can steal one against a Villanova. I don't know if you can do it against UConn, Creighton, or Marquette, but maybe against a St. John's or a Providence. Maybe not like a 24-point blowout like they did on Senior Day at the AMP, but and even non-conference, they could steal a game from a USC or a Missouri. Definitely don't want to jump to conclusions against Baylor at all. I definitely wouldn't want to. I definitely don't. It's hard to win at the Farrell Center, regardless of who you are. So, lots to look forward to. Again, we're tipping off a week from today at the time of recording, November 6th. Again, if you're in the area, hopefully you got your tickets. Get your butts to the Rock. Support this group. And I know I'm only going to have to support from afar. I know I have a Big East podcast, but listen, I'm an alum. I have a rooting interest, and I'm not afraid to show it. I'm not biased, but I do. Of course, I pull for the Hawk, blue and white all day. But and then I don't know. I don't know what ticket sales have been like for the game in Walsh for Veterans Day, but I would assume they're doing well. I feel like it's not very difficult to sell that place out. But speaking of FDU, I think Pat, I know you and I talked about this, but the goal is to get my buddy Tom Kiley. He's an assistant coach now with the Knights in his first year, previously director of basketball ops at VMI and then Chattanooga. And before all that, he was the first friend I made at Seton Hall and was a manager on the basketball team during the years that we were in school together, same time, 14 to 18. So that's what to look ahead to for the next episode. But before we sign off, Pat, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I'll be at the Rock next Monday night. I hope that people. I hope we get a good student turnout. Particularly, except for the Rutgers game, there's not a lot of juice in the non-conference schedule before finals. But you got to lay the foundation. And I think that's something. I know that I think there's a guy JT who is the current leader of the Big Blue what do they call that?
Bluebeard.
The Bluebeard Army. I think it's something where the students provide most of the energy in that building, as they do in a lot of other buildings around the country. I think if you get a full or close to full student section, that fires up the team. As you know from your experiences at Seton Hall and from my experiences at Seton Hall, if the students buy into it and they show up, particularly, I think you show up on a game like Monday, you show up for Rutgers, and you do the best you can with some of these non-conference games. That sets the tone for what you can expect when Big East play starts, after the new year. Now, again, granted, there'll be those early conference games where it's winter break and, you'll get a smattering of people in the student section. But I think they come back, if I'm not mistaken, and somebody can correct me, on January the 16th. That's the end of the Martin Luther King weekend. And who comes to the Rock on January 16th?
Uncle Ricky.
Big bad Rick Pitino and St. John's. And if that's one game that every Seton Hall fan should circle on their calendar, that's one where, for all the talk and all the chatter that those St. John's people have had, if Seton Hall the fans need to do their best to make sure that Pitino and his bunch of St. John's mercenaries walk out of Newark with an L. And that's there's going to be a few games that you want to win. Rutgers, I think you want to win at least one of those St. John's games. And January 16th, if the Bluebeard Army is in full force and the Rock is shaking up and down, I think that's something which I St. John's is going to have to do a lot to overcome that. So I know it's 2.5 months in the future, but that's just something to think about. For the students and the Bluebeard Army, set the tone during these non-conference games, and then you come back in full force January the 16th, and then for the rest of the Big East season going forward.
And don't forget, the Big East opener, I feel like finals might be over by then, but first Big East game, and that's first conference game of the year in general, they got the defending national champs coming to town in UConn with a 7:00 tip December 20th. But, and listen, and I guess, this is what I'll end it with from experience, all right? And I feel like this is universal through any Division I student section, even like, down to D2, D3, wherever. Students and fans in general will come out more when their team is winning more. And listen, from experience, 2015, my freshman year, they were out in droves when, first week of conference play. They took down number 15 St. John's and number 6 Villanova in the same week during winter break. I think it was like New Year's Eve in the first game of the new year 3 days later. And they had, with a number next to their name, more people came out. But then when that unfortunate February collapse happened, I don't think there were more than, if we're going up the risers, I don't think there were more than like 3 or 4 rows full. Like I don't think there were more than 100 students by the time we played Creighton, which ended that losing streak and gave us our first win in 4 weeks or whatever it was. But then turn around, look at 2016. Team started winning, and little by little, fan turnout kept going up, and so did the student section turnout. And it made all the difference. So what I tried to do when I was leader of the Bluebeard Army, trying to have it go in reverse, like start the big turnouts early, make a difference so that they're succeeding early in the year, so that no one's going to be like a fair weather fan and then only come out when they're thriving and succeeding at a high level. So I mean, essentially that's the kind of sales pitch I'm making here. Come out to these early games, set the tone. The guys will feed off that. And I've learned this through psychology, and my brother can attest to this, is psychology, double major in psych and Spanish at JMU. Go Dukes, by the way, undefeated in football. He understands like sports psychology, and I could understand it too, that players are more receptive to positive cheering, like let's go Pirates, defense, like chants that are directed towards them to try to encourage them, than it is to just direct and talk all your trash, pardon my language, I'll talk all your shit to the opposition, because no matter where they go for a road game, they hear it everywhere they go, and they probably become immune to it by the time Big East play rolls around. So with that in mind, you can still chirp and whatnot, but my psychology, my philosophy, the guys will respond better and feed more off of those pro Pirates chants than it will to try to drive the other team down by chirping them. It's simple psychology, and I really don't think there's really much more to it. So that's my little public service announcement for this current crop of Bluebeard Army members. Fight the good fight. Go Pirates. And that's going to do it for episode 3 of Hoist the Colors. So for Patrick Madden, I'm Tim Best. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you next week for the first episode of the official season. I know we previewed St. Peter's a little bit, but hopefully we'll get Seton Hall alum and good friend of mine, Tom Kiley, assistant coach at FDU, on the next episode to preview that matchup, the first and only matchup that the Pirates will play inside Walt's Gym this season. So until next time, onward to Tonia. Take care, y'all.